Hey gang, thanks for listening. Got a couple of cool ghost stories for you, and a couple of them are a little bit more of the famous side. So I think you'll be able to pick those two out pretty easily outside of the ones that I've picked up elsewhere and the ones that have been submitted. Thanks to everyone who did submit. And real quick, and I won't keep you too long, I want to remind everybody about how you can get a free trial of Amazon Music Unlimited. Customizable playlists, podcasts, I'm featured there myself. Anything that you would like to hear on your mobile device, doesn't matter what it is, or your PC, laptop, whatever it is that you use to get your music, check out Amazon Music Unlimited. Go to getamazonmusic.com/unclejoshtruescarystories, and right now, as we're coming up on Prime Day, you can get 4 months free. 4-month free trial of Amazon Music Unlimited. getamazonmusic.com/unclejoshtruescarystories. I use it. I support it. It's terrific. You guys should check it out. Over 70 million songs and all the podcasts that you want to listen to. And remember, Prime Day deals are coming up. Prime Day is actually 2 days this year. June 21st, June 22nd. They're kicking off summer with 2 days of incredible deals and the best savings. And go and get your free 4-month trial of Amazon Music Unlimited. getamazonmusic.com/unclejoshtruescarystories. And now, Campfire crew, let's get it on. The Voices on the Phone by Carolyn D. When I was pregnant with my oldest daughter, Mike and I bought a house in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. It was in the middle of nowhere, and we drove down winding roads for 40 minutes just to go grocery shopping. And most of our neighbors were only around in the summer or on holidays. It was a nice little house next to a creek, and in the kitchen mounted on the wall was an old-fashioned dial phone with a coiled cord. When we first moved in, I picked up the receiver and heard a quiet conversation between two women about hair dye. I didn't want to eavesdrop, so I said, "Hello, who is this?" The ladies stopped talking. Then one said, "Did you hear that?" "Yes, is someone there?" "Hi, can you hear me?" I said. But then it was silent. No voices, just a faint dial tone. I quickly decided this old phone was somehow hooked up to an old-fashioned party line. After that, we used the phone very little, preferring our cordless phone hooked up in the other room. The handful of times I did use that phone, I could hear whispered voices in the background, always assuring the other person that the line sometimes picked up other calls. A year and a half passed, and we mostly forgot the phone was even there. Then in September of 1999, Hurricane Floyd passed through our area, leaving us without power and the road with large, impassable trees blocking the way. Fortunately, we were already prepared. We had stored food and clean water in a paranoid frenzy for Y2K, and we desperately needed it all. We bathed in the creek, painted in the day, and played board games by candlelight while waiting for our power to be restored. After a week, the road was clear, but still no power, and it was getting tedious for Mike and me, though 1-year-old Chloe was loving all of it. I lamented that we couldn't call my sister as the cordless phone didn't work without electricity, and we heard an unfamiliar ring. It was the wall phone in the kitchen. I raced to it and heard the faint voice of my sister. She was just checking in on us and invited us up to her place until our power came on. So off we went for 5 days, and when we returned, everything was back to normal, and I was so glad we had a hardwired phone that didn't rely on electricity. A couple of years passed, and the phone was mostly ignored, except by 3-year-old Chloe, who thought it would look better covered in sparkly stickers. The power went out at least once or twice a summer, usually just for a few hours. During one of these outages, Mike decided to try the phone in the kitchen to make a call, but it was dead. Concerned, he drove up the road to the local country store and called AT&T's service line. I believe the conversation went something like this. Hello, yes, my phone has stopped working. Can I have your account number? Yes, it's X number. Well, I don't see anything wrong here. Well, we don't have any power right now. Well, that would be the problem. No, but we have an old-fashioned dial phone hooked up in the kitchen. It should still work. I'm sorry, but according to our records, you have no phone in the kitchen. Yeah, we do. I've used it. No, you don't. If you do, it's not connected through us. Oh, okay. After this, Mike came home, walked into the kitchen, and pulled the phone off the wall. The only wire in it was about 3 inches long and was attached to nothing. It was never hooked up. The California Ghost. Joe Hyams, a reporter, and his actress wife, Elka Summer, moved into a 2-story home in Beverly Hills, California in July of 1964. Only a few days later, the first of a series of reports of a ghost began. Mr. Hyams was not home, and his wife had invited a guest for tea during the afternoon. As the guest, a journalist, described the incident to an investigator later, she saw a man come out of the area of the swimming pool where she was visiting. He walked quickly around the pool and seemed to be looking intently at something. She described him as being middle-aged with a potato nose. He was dressed in a black suit with a white shirt and tie. The guest was puzzled because she had not been introduced to the man, and when she glanced toward him a second time, he was no longer there. She asked what had become of the man, but nobody knew whom she was talking about. A similar experience was related about 2 weeks later by a man who was cleaning the swimming pool. He had been told that the house would be empty that day since the owners were away. Therefore, he was surprised when he glanced in the window and saw a man walking quickly toward the dining room with his hands behind his back. He described him as an older, heavy-set man with graying hair, wearing dark trousers and a white shirt and tie. The maintenance man went into the house to see who was there, but could not find a trace of the man he had seen through the windows. Mr. Hyams actually wrote an article for the Saturday Evening Post relating the series of strange events in the house. He and his wife noticed unusual noises coming from the dining room at night, like the sound of chairs being pushed back from the table. But every time they checked, the chairs were all in place. During August, Mr. Hyams happened to be staying home alone for a few weeks, and he had the strange feeling that someone was there with him. Each morning, a particular downstairs bedroom window that had been shut and locked the night before was found open. The front door was heard to open and shut twice, but no one was there, and the sounds of chairs being pushed back from the table in the dining room continued. In an attempt to solve the problem, Mr. Hyams brought 3 miniature radio transmitters and 3 FM radios to pick up the signals. He also purchased 3 tape recorders, one for each radio. He placed 1 microphone near a driveway entrance, another at the front door, and a third one on the bar in the dining room. The equipment was turned on that night so that any sounds would be broadcast upstairs to the radios in the bedroom. At the same time, they would be recorded on the tape machines. The noise of the chairs moving below was heard again, this time clearly over the broadcast system. Mr. Hyams went downstairs with a pistol, and when he switched on the dining room lights, the sound stopped. All the chairs were in place. The positions of the legs had been marked on the floor earlier with chalk, and nothing had been moved. When the tape was played back later, the entire sequence was there. First the sounds of the chairs moving, then the sound stopping as the click of the light switch was heard. The tape also picked up the noise of Mr. Hyams coughing while he was in the dining room. Then after he had left the room, the tape picked up still more sounds of the chairs moving. A friend of Mr. Hymes's, who had not been told about the ghost, stayed in the house while his own was being redecorated and the Hymeses were away. The friend wrote to Mr. Hymes giving his own report of the same noises and the strange opening of the same downstairs window. Mr. Hymes hired a private detective to watch the house while he was away, and the detective reported seeing all the lights go on at once when no one was home. The strange events and reports continued. Altogether, 4 people witnessed an unknown man moving around the house. These reports were separated by varying periods of time. Information about the case reached the Neuropsychiatric Institute at UCLA. Dr. Constance and Dr. Gordney of the Institute arranged for an investigation of the case. Dr. Thelma Moss, a coworker, and Dr. Gertrude Schmeidler, a psychologist at City College in New York, worked together on a plan. Dr. Schmeidler had tried a new method of investigation with another haunted house, and Dr. Moss decided to follow a similar idea. The plan was carried out with the cooperation of members of the American Society for Psychical Research. Dr. Moss and Dr. Schmeidler did not actually go to the house. In this way, they hoped to be able to report the results more objectively. The Hymes were anxious for a solution to the problem and gave full cooperation to the scientists. First, the ASPR members interviewed separately each of the 4 people who had seen the strange man. Their descriptions were somewhat similar. Dr. Moss made up a list of words that described a variety of physical appearances and personality traits. Within this list were scattered the words the 4 witnesses had used to describe the man and his personality. Also, a diagram was drawn up of the room plan of each floor of the house and the surrounding grounds. 16 people were chosen to fill out a form choosing the words that best described the ghost of the man, and those words that were most unlike the man. They were also asked to check the places on the house plans where the ghost might have been seen. 8 of these people were chosen as what are called control subjects. They had never been to the house, knew nothing about it. They were simply told that a male ghost had been reported at the house. Each control subject was taken through the house by an ASPR member and asked to fill out the forms as if he could imagine seeing a male ghost there. The second group of 8 people had one quality in common. They were all reported to have unusual psychic abilities. They could at times give accurate information about people whom they did not know, suggest events that might actually occur later, or relate accurate information that they felt came from persons who were no longer living. These individuals, who seem to be in contact with a world unknown to most people, are psychics. The 8 sensitives were taken separately to the Himes house by an ASPR worker. They had been told nothing about the details of the reports of the ghost. Each sensitive was free to walk anywhere in the house or on the grounds and to form impressions of what the ghost might have been like, or where it may have been appearing. On their individual excursions, each sensitive described some perception of a personality. One reported seeing a girl near the pool, where there was no one there. The other sensitives gave various descriptions of a man, specifying his personality and activity. In addition to the 8 control subjects and 8 sensitives, the forms were also given to the 4 eyewitnesses to fill out. Then, all the forms were compared. As was expected, the descriptions given by the control subject had little in common with the descriptions given by the 4 witnesses. Of the forms submitted by the 8 sensitives, 2 were not used because they were not filled out correctly. Of the forms submitted by the other 6 sensitives, only 3 showed a high similarity to those of the witnesses. Even among the witnesses, some of the descriptions did not agree. But there was enough agreement between the 3 sensitives and some of the witnesses' checklists to show that at least these 3 sensitives had sensed a ghost, much like the man who had been reported earlier. It turned out that the description of the girl seen by the pool fitted that of a girl whom Mrs. Himes had known in Europe, who had died recently. In some ways, the ghost of the man was like a doctor with whom Mr. Himes had done some work, and who had also recently died. The ghost also seemed somewhat like Mrs. Himes' father, who had died some time earlier. During the course of the investigation, one of the sensitives reported her impressions that there was going to be a fire in the house, possibly in about 6 months, but not necessarily that soon. She thought that it would be raining when the fire broke out, and she also predicted that Mr. and Mrs. Himes would move out of the house within 2 years. Early in the morning of March 13, 1967, during an unusual California rainstorm, fire did break out in the Himes house. Mr. and Mrs. Adams were awakened by a loud pounding on their bedroom door. When Mr. Himes opened it, there was nothing but smoke. He and his wife crawled out of a window to safety, and they later found out that the fire had started in the mysterious dining room. True to the prediction, Mr. and Mrs. Himes moved out of the house and put it up for sale. The mystery of the ghost, the fire, and the warning pounding on the bedroom door were left behind. The House in Beech, Bluff by Dimetime99. I've had a few experiences with the unexplained, but this, by far, was the worst paranormal experience I've ever had. Many moons ago, I moved in with a good friend whose house was way out on the sticks of this weird gravel road. My friend did tell me that his house may be haunted because of the history of it, and because of strange things that he had been seeing and hearing. He didn't believe in ghosts and the paranormal as much as I did, so he didn't pay much attention to anything moving and any strange sounds. The day I moved in, he told me about the history of the house. He told me that a family of 3, a mother, father, and daughter, lived in the house when the house was first built years ago. Their daughter committed suicide in her bedroom upstairs, the only room upstairs. And several years after the mother and father moved out of the house, A few families bought and sold it until my friend's parents bought it as a fixer-upper. They began remodeling it. The stairs were removed and the second story was completely sealed off, and a drop ceiling was put in to cover the old ceiling and cover the opening to the top floor. My friend's parents were aware of the history of the house, so I assumed that was the reason they removed the stairs and installed a drop ceiling. I've never been in a house that had such a strange layout or floor plan. The living room and 2 bedrooms were in the front of the house. The dining room was on the other side of the living room wall, and the kitchen was behind the dining room at the back of the house. The one bathroom was at the end of a long hallway. And that was it, just a long hallway with a bathroom at the end of it. Anyway, when I first started noticing little things out of place and odd sounds, it was kind of cool and fascinating. We would hear footsteps down the hallway, and we would hear things moving. Things would fall off the kitchen counters. Nothing alarming, and most of the activity happened in the daytime. But things started happening more often, and it slowly started to annoy us. The activity was now happening day and night. My friend and I started distancing ourselves from the house by partying all night and crashing wherever we passed out. We would stay at our parents' or grandparents' houses. All of this back and forth from friends' houses to parents' houses, drinking and partying all the time had worn me out, and I needed a break. That's when I decided to head out to that house, just for some alone time, some peace and quiet. We hadn't been out there for days, and I figured if I watched a movie at a high volume or listened to some music loudly, I wouldn't hear anything and I'd be fine. If I got bored with watching movies or TV, I'd go jump on my drum kit and jam out. But little did I know that the shit was about to hit the fan. I was sitting there all alone just watching TV. Our TV was hooked up to a stereo so we could watch movies and listen to music as loud as we wanted. I was watching some show, and the stereo cut off. We had an entertainment center that held the TV, stereo, a few lamps, and a clock, etc. But suddenly the stereo cut off, but the TV and everything else that was in there in the entertainment center stayed on, even though all of the devices were plugged into the same power strip. There was dead silence, and that's when I began to hear whispering, like several people whispering all at once. The whispering was coming from the kitchen, which I mentioned was at the back of the house. It kept getting louder and louder until I had to go outside to see if the whispering was my mind playing tricks on me. But it was quiet outside. No whispering. There was a storm coming, so I did hear thunder, but no whispering. As soon as I got comfortable, I heard the whispering around the side of the house, and it was gradually getting louder. Dang, I had to go back inside. But it was quiet. And then, ba-boom, as loud as hell, a clap of thunder. It scared the heck out of me. After cringing from the tremendous thunderclap, I relaxed and started down the hall to the bathroom. The hallway always made me uncomfortable. It was a long one that went to the bathroom, like I said, nothing else. I started down the hallway when I heard this creaking sound directly behind me. As I turned my head, I saw from the corner of my eye the front door slowly creaking open, and something I can only explain as the fight-or-flight response told me to shut the damn door right then. So I dove towards the door, sliding across the floor on my stomach, crashing right into it, slamming it shut. I remember feeling like all of that happened in slow motion. Anyway, I slid across the floor, slammed the door shut, and then jumped up and had the most intense feeling that someone or something was right behind me. You know when someone's trying to sneak up on you and you get this bizarre feeling that someone or something is right there? I don't know the best way to describe that feeling, but it's just not a good feeling. Anyway, it was more than a feeling that something was just behind me. Whatever it was, it felt angry or enraged, and it wanted to hurt me. It honestly felt like I was about to be violently attacked from behind by who knows what. This feeling was so intense that I closed my eyes, bent down, and tensed up, preparing for an attack. Then nothing. The feeling was gone. I quickly turned around expecting to catch a glimpse of my attacker, but there was nothing there. After realizing that I was alone, I grabbed my wallet, my hat, and keys, and I left. When I came back, I packed up my belongings and moved out, and I rented a U-Haul so I could just get all of my stuff out of there in one trip. I've witnessed several paranormal events in my life, but this one was the worst. All the other paranormal experiences I've witnessed haven't been that bad, but there have been a handful of experiences that weren't cool at all. I will never forget any of the paranormal activity I've witnessed throughout my life, especially this one. True Urban Legend, submitted by Rhett S. My name is Rhett, and I've always been interested in the paranormal. Years ago, I looked up and found haunted areas around me, and I found an elementary school down the road from where I live. I won't name the city I live in, nor the name of the school due to fear of the school getting harassed, but I promise this is true. One night in September, I went down to the school to investigate. I got onto the playground, which was obviously in an open ground. I spent about 45 minutes walking around the track and swinging on the swings, and then I began to hear noises coming from the inside of the school, which sounded like someone slamming lockers. Believing it was a cleaning crew and not wanting to be on the grounds after hours, it was 12:40 at night, I left. The following summer, my cousin was visiting, and we found ourselves telling ourselves ghost stories. I told him about the school, and we went out there. This time it was a Saturday night in June, so I wasn't worried about a cleaning crew, despite there being a car in the parking lot. We went to the playground, and right off the bat, my cousin informed me that someone was in the playground. I turned to my left and saw someone with their cell phone. I could see their cell phone because the background was glowing, like he had just called somebody. I watched as the man got into his car in the parking lot, started it, and left. I stress the man part because my cousin is now convinced that we just saw a ghost. His reasons were we would have seen him walking around and not just when he was leaving. To prove his point, my cousin walked around the park with my cell phone, and despite the fact I could see my cousin with a cell phone, it still didn't prove the fact that what we had seen was a ghost. We got back together and began to argue if what we had seen was a ghost or not. I said no, but he was convinced that the guy we had just seen drive away was a ghost. I told my cousin, look, if it was a ghost, we wouldn't have seen the phone nor him drive away. As I asked my cousin if he was an idiot, I heard a little girl's laughter coming from behind my cousin's left shoulder. On the inside, I was flipping out, though I kept my composure because my cousin was already flipping out. Then my cousin turned and looked over his left shoulder, and I asked him if he had heard that, and he said yes. I asked him what he heard and where it came from. He confirmed what I already knew. He'd heard a little girl laughing at him, and it was coming from behind him. As we looked around, all we saw was a tree. And we looked around the park and saw no one there with us after the guy left when we first got there. Also, there was nowhere anyone could have gone to hide or leave without us seeing them. Yeah, it was nighttime, but we were standing by the only entrance exit that there was. I told my cousin that the school was haunted, but I never told him what had happened. The story is there was a little girl who died in a freak accident while in a merry-go-round. And I've never really confirmed that, hence why I don't want to give out the school's name. Apparently, she slipped one day while on the merry-go-round, and either she had her neck snapped or her head come clean off. Over the years, there had been reports of seeing a little girl standing by a tree. We didn't see her by a tree, but we did hear her. This was back in 2009, and my cousin and I hardly talk nowadays. But when we do, the subject of that little ghost girl and her laugh always gets brought up. It haunts us both to this day. The White Rocking Chair by Anonymous. So, this is a true story, and it actually happened to my mom. It may seem unbelievable, but it really did happen. My mom had a loving relationship with her grandma and loved to visit her as a child until her unfortunate passing. However, strange things happened to her when she used to visit her house and to her grandma. In one instance, they were gardening together when footprints appeared in the freshly sowed soil. My mom's aunt moved into this house after my mom's grandma had passed. Then my aunt passed away recently, unfortunately. So my mom was there helping her uncle with selling stuff from the house and having a garage sale. She just called while on her way home and told me this. While selling some stuff, she suddenly saw this white rocking chair, and there was a small boy about 10 rocking in the chair very hard. He had brown hair, and my mom walked by and said something like, "Having fun in that rocking chair?" To which the little boy looked at her very angrily and replied, "It's haunted." My mom laughed and said, "Really? How do you know?" And the little boy said, "It's haunted, I can feel it." And then he walked off, and my mom couldn't find him. It was as if he had disappeared. She asked one of the other people helping if they saw the boy, and they said no, which was reasonable since there were a lot of people walking around. She then looked around and then asked where the white rocking chair was, and everyone replied, "What chair?" The other two people who stayed in that house also said weird things were happening all night. I mean, I'm sorry, but what chair? What kind of answer is that? Heck no. I mean, this is all horror movie material, and all I'm saying is that I do not care how much family history we have in this house. I will never be visiting it ever again. Nope, nope, nope. Nope, with a capital nope. The Manor House Ghost. In 1964, the cameras of the National Broadcasting Company were taken to England to attempt the filming of a TV special on famous haunted houses. The name of the program, The Stately Ghosts of England, was based on the name of a book that had been written about the houses. One of the most interesting old homes was the manor house called Longleat. The television team interviewed people who had seen or heard ghosts in the house, and they also tried to photograph the locations where the ghosts had been reported, with some strange results. The Marquis of Bath, whose ancestors who had lived in the house, gave the account of a ghost called the Green Lady. A family portrait of her shows a lady in a green gown. Her name was Lady Louisa Carteret, and one of Lord Bath's ancestors had married her in 1735. However, the marriage did not go well. Lady Louisa met a young man at a dance given at Longleat and fell in love with him. In a hall on the third floor of the house, Louisa's husband fought a duel with her lover and killed him. Within a short time, Lady Louisa herself died of a broken heart, and the third-floor hall where the duel occurred is the place where the strange things have been noticed. Even servants of the house would go out of their way to avoid walking through that section. The NBC crew set up cameras to photograph the third-floor area, and from the very beginning they had mysterious problems. Roll after roll of color film was developed and showed nothing at all but yellowish or greenish haze. New cameras were brought in, and new film stock was tried, with no better results. Automatic equipment had been set up to shoot film footage during the night. It would be found inexplicably shut off the following morning. The tapes from tape recorders were also as bad as the muddy films. Unusual accidents also began to occur. By itself, a reflector floodlight rolled out of a bedroom, down a hall, hit a banister, then fell over it to crash to the open stairwell. It almost hit an NBC crew member. Other lights blew up, and telephones went dead. It was reported that during an attempt to film a grandfather clock striking midnight, every other clock in the house struck the hour except the one that was being photographed. A crew member made some sharp remarks about the clock, and the next day he had an automobile accident. Finally, the film director tried a new approach. As strange as he felt about it, he walked into the third-floor hall and said to the ghosts, "I believe you're doing this. If you want me to ask your permission, I do humbly ask that you permit us to put this story on film." After that, the trouble stopped, and a special camera on the third floor filmed a most unusual sequence. This camera had been set up to take shots automatically at intervals during the night, and when the time-lapse shots were developed, there was a sequence in slow motion. It showed a light like an automobile headlight, coming out one door, moving down the hall, and then disappearing behind another door. No one could figure out any logical explanation for the light, as all other windows had been blacked out. The rest of the filming was completed without any unusual difficulty, and the TV special, The Stately Ghosts of England, complete with the movie of the mysterious moving light, was broadcast on January 25th, 1965. Sister's Phone Call by Eros. In December of 1990, I was living in New York City trying to make it in the rock music industry. The last time I saw my sister, Dully, was the year before when she visited us. One morning as I was getting ready for my day job, I received the phone call no brother ever wants to receive. It was my mother saying 3 words I will never forget. "Todd, she's gone." And so began my new life, the life where my beautiful sister was no longer on this earth. Dully was one of those rare people that everyone loved. She had an incredible caring soul. I know we tend to only remember the positives about people and conveniently forget the negatives when a person dies, But I can honestly say my sister didn't have very many negative qualities. She was a soft, sweet, caring soul that was apparently only meant to walk this earth for 25 years in this incarnation. She cared deeply for me and nurtured me almost like a second mom, and we were very close. We'd both grown up in an abusive home after our parents divorced, and when my mother remarried, our teen years were spent in a volatile home thanks to our stepdad, which is why it wasn't any surprise looking back now that even in death she wanted to take care of me by letting me know that she was okay. Now at the time, I didn't know who was trying to call. It all started when I was alone in the apartment one night, not long after her accident. It was exactly midnight when the phone rang, and I know this because I had a digital clock next to me with those big red digital display numbers. I picked up the phone and heard what sounded like this loud white noise, like TV static back in the day when you would turn the channel and it was just a static screen. So I said, "Hello? Hello?" And nothing. Not thinking much of it, I hung up and went back to bed. Then the phone rang again. I looked at the clock, and it was now 12:15 a.m. Same thing on the phone. Loud static. Living in NYC at the time, I started thinking maybe it was a bandmate calling from a subway station and a train was going by as they called. But I never did hear anything other than static. Every time I would go back to bed, like clockwork, literally, every 15 minutes on the dot, the phone would ring. 12:30, 12:45, 1 a.m., 1:15, and so on. At this point, I just knew it was my sister. Goosebumps came over me, and that knowing only you can quantify without knowing how it is you know something. I mean, you just do. This went on at precise 15-minute increments until the final phone call at 3 a.m., and then it stopped for good. At the time, I didn't know about spirits using the phone sometimes to try to contact loved ones from beyond. But then I came across a book a few years later that described my experience nearly to a T. I'm not sure why she was unable to make her voice audible above the white noise. I mean, perhaps her soul was too new to the other dimension and wasn't able to project enough energy. I mean, no matter. In the end, I know it was her trying to tell me she was okay. I had many wonderful contact dreams from her in the following few years after her passing. And at one point, I attended a psychic reading with a panel of respected psychics from the northeast region of the U.S. They were providing readings using psychometry. I brought the framed photo Dully had given me of herself just a year before she passed, which, if you knew my sister, that in and of herself was an incredible feat, as she hated her photo being taken. But inexplicably, she had portraits of herself taken that she had given to her closest family and friends, not long before her accident. I mean, that alone still blows my mind. I raised my hand and offered the framed photo to the row of psychics, and the information they provided me was nothing short of astounding. The feeling of cold signifying the person is no longer in the earth realm. Yes. The passing was due to a car accident involving a large truck of some sort. Yeah, she was killed instantly on a rainy evening coming home and didn't even see the semi-truck that was parked half in the road for mechanical trouble. Her death was quick. She showed them the lights out, meaning that she didn't suffer. True. She was with a father figure and they were holding hands. The father figure had heart trouble of some sort causing his death. This was also correct. My father died 6 months after Dully in a car accident, and we believe it was a broken heart that caused the accident. I always gravitated towards the unknown and the paranormal, but my interest in spirituality, metaphysics, consciousness, and life after death didn't accelerate until after they had both died. In the years since, I've had a full-blown awakening, and my sister gets all the credit. While I still am struggling with the human part of myself, and far from perfect, all of the good within me and my desire to always strive to be a better father, husband, friend, son, and man is due to her influence, both while she was still on the earth and even now in the afterlife. The day we are reunited again will be one sweet day indeed. Haunted House, submitted by Jennifer Y. My family has an old farmhouse that's been kind of handed down for generations. It was built outside a little town in Indiana called Seymour, about 70 miles from Indianapolis. My great-grandfather built it and the barn in 1882, and both still stand today, albeit the farmhouse has been renovated and updated. It's where I live now with my husband and teenage son and daughter. The farmland that my great-grandfather and grandfather ran was sold a long time ago, as no one in the family, including my dad, wanted to make their living that way. When my grandparents decided to move to Arizona, they gave the farmhouse to my dad, sold all but about 20 acres of grassland and some trees surrounding the house. This is kind of a complicated story because no one can figure out why the things happening in the farmhouse were going on, but they started when my dad was about 12 years old, and as best as we can tell, there's a reason for why the things have happened. As farmers, the family got up very early and worked very late, and I think that's why the guy we think is the cause of the disturbances stumbled to our house. In the spring of 1956, my grandfather, uncles, and father were working in the barn late one night trying to repair a tractor. My mother and aunt had gone to bed as they were charged with getting up early and making breakfast before morning chores and then all the kids having to go to school. And that's when this guy showed up, a man that I will call Stephen. Stephen had been in a bad automobile accident about half a mile up our road. At a high rate of speed, his car jumped railroad tracks, and he flew off the road and into some trees. He was injured badly. He had a broken arm and split the back of his head open. Somehow he crawled or walked his way to the only light he saw, and that was the light in our barn. He got onto our front porch and started knocking and asking for help. My grandmother came down and answered the door, and then screamed at this bloody man leaning against the door. My aunt had followed her down, of course also screamed too, and then ran to the phone as there was an extension out to the barn. This man Stephen kept saying he was sorry, and that he wanted to go home, as my aunt told him that help was coming. The menfolk came running, and my grandfather called the sheriff. My dad and uncles were trying to keep Stephen awake, and talked about how they could get him to the medical center in town. Sadly, Stephen was bleeding badly, and before they could get him to a flatbed or the sheriff to come out, he died right on our porch. The last thing he said was, "Why didn't you help me?" That was odd. Everyone was doing everything they could to help him. Later in life, my dad always said that Stephen was a goner way before he got to our house. There was really nothing we could do. The sheriff and an ambulance came out and took him away, and they also found his mangled car. It wasn't until about a month later, after everything had settled down and my dad and uncle stopped having bad dreams about the guy, that strange things began to happen. For a couple of weeks, something would bang on the front door of the house right around the same time Stephen had first shown up on the porch. Every time someone went to check, there was no one there. This happened on and off for years, and even into when I was growing up in the house. One night around 1987, there was a violent thunderstorm, and my brother and I were home alone. We lost power and put out candles and made sure all the windows were closed. But after about an hour of high winds and crazy rain, things subsided, and we heard the pounding on the front door. My brother ran to it and opened it, and that was not a good move. The storm door ripped open, and a huge blast of air came rushing past us, and it was not Mother Nature. The next thing we knew, the two front windows that looked out onto the porch flew open. We'd locked them securely, as our parents always told us to do in a storm. As we stood looking at each other, the rush of wind came back and ripped past us and went up the stairs to the second floor. How do I know? There was a one step up before the stairs turned left, and it went on upstairs, and a window, which was closed, had some curtains on it, and they blew straight upward. My brother and I then heard a loud bang from upstairs, as if a door had been slammed shut. Scared, but also curious, we went upstairs with candles and saw that the only door that was shut was our spare room. There was nothing in there but our Commodore 64 and my mom's sewing machine and accessories. I'll mention that there were 4 bedrooms upstairs, off of one open landing, and a door to the walk-up attic. Those were all open. We didn't open the spare room door. By the time my parents got home, the power was back on and we told them what had happened. My dad didn't say a word and ran right upstairs and flung the door open. We all followed and stood behind him as he stared into the room. Everything was a mess. The only thing that wasn't upset was the desk our computer sat on. But the spare bed, my mom's sewing table, the bodice mannequin, the armchair, all of it was thrown all over the place. That was the weird part. We never heard any of that happening, not one sound. But there all these things were, tossed about. My dad turned around and told us to go back downstairs, and he went to my parents' room and called somebody. It was our pastor. My parents, unlike me, were really into our religion. I'm still going to church, and I still believe and have a faith, but I was not into it the way my parents were. I don't know what my dad and the pastor talked about, but our pastor did come out the next day after my parents said to stay out of the room. My mom did put things back in order after he came over the next day, but things seemed to get worse. One morning, we all came down for breakfast, and all of the kitchen cupboards had been opened and the contents stacked on the floor and the kitchen table. Foodstuffs were spilled all over the place, and it was a giant mess. I actually stayed home from school that day to help my mom clean up. Then came the knocking in the walls. At night, there was a loud knocking in all of our bedroom walls, but not at the same time. The first time I heard it, my dad woke up and I could hear him walking around the house trying to find the source of the bumps. But every time he went into a room, the knocking would happen in another part of the house. This went on for a few nights, and I could tell my dad was getting pissed. He called our pastor again, and this time he came out and said some prayers with us and blessed the house. Things subsided, and nothing really happened again until 1990, when I was a senior in high school. I was a cheerleader, and our big football game with our rival school was coming up as part of our homecoming. My mom and I made sure that my uniform was all set to go the night before, but when I went to get it, it was not where we left it. Frantic, okay, I know, I'm being dramatic about it. This was a big deal to me back then. We looked around everywhere, but couldn't find my Spankies, my skirt, or my sweater. Right before it was time for us to leave, we heard a loud thump coming from that spare room. And when we went to look, there, on a chair, was my stuff. I had to get dressed, and my mom and I didn't talk about it until we were well on our way to the game. Neither of us had been in that room for days. Later that night, the window to that room kept opening and closing loudly. I mean, it would slam open and slam shut. It happened at least 5 times before my dad lost it, went down to the basement and got some big carpenter nails and then nailed it shut. More things happened after I went to college, but my parents didn't talk a lot about it. They kept having people from the church over to bless the place, and it always seemed to get things quiet for a time. Fast forward to last year. The house became ours, and my husband started working from home during COVID, and I was still running a jewelry business from home. Our kids were also doing instruction at home, and they had never heard any of these stories before, and nothing had ever happened while they were home. But in April of last year, things did start happening again. At first it was little things, just strange sounds, the knocking in the walls, doors opening and closing, and lights turning on and off by themselves. But then came the footsteps at night. From our bedroom, my husband and I could hear a knock on the front door, and then footsteps walking on the porch, and then also walking around downstairs. Whenever we checked, there was no one there. One late afternoon, my husband and I ran out to Walmart and Home Depot to get the supplies we needed. We were running a little late. It was about 10 after 10 when we got home. My son was sitting in the living room with our daughter who was crying. She ran over to me and hugged me and told me about this awful man on the porch who kept knocking on the door. He was covered in blood, and she said he kept asking why we didn't help him. As I mentioned, my kids had never heard the story about that guy from the 50s. No one ever wrote it down, and no one ever spoke about it. I calmed the kids down and then made some popcorn for a movie night distraction and told them that it was nothing, and they were probably just imagining things. I calmed the kids down and then made some popcorn for a movie night distraction and told them that they were probably just imagining things and maybe they were watching too many scary movies. After the kids went to sleep, my husband and I talked about it, and he said maybe another visit from our pastor was in order. Like I said, I believe and have my faith, but I'm not as into the church as my father was. I agreed, and we planned to call Reverend Jim the next day. It was really late, and I was switching off the lights when there came a knock on the front door. My husband went to it, opened it, and stood staring. And I ran over, and there on the porch was a man who looked all bloody, standing a few feet from the door. He looked right at us, and I was holding back a scream, but I knew he wasn't a living being, as I could sort of see through him. He quietly asked, "Why didn't you help me?" And my husband quietly said back, "They did try to help you, but you were already gone. You need to go now. There's nothing else we can do." This ghost, or whatever you want to call it, looked at us, looked down, and then just faded away. We closed the door and held on to each other for a long time, and the next day we did call our pastor and told him what happened. He came out saying he could only stay on the porch due to COVID and all the other people he had to see as part of his church leadership, safety reasons. He said some prayers with us, and afterward, he said he had a strange feeling that there was someone else there with us lying on the porch, but was gone when we finished praying. I asked him if he believed in ghosts, and he said the only ghost he believed in was the Holy Ghost, but something still was bothering him there. Reverend Jim said goodbye, and nothing has happened since. We've spoken with him at church services since so much of the band stuff has been lifted, and while we don't talk about it with our kids, we're sure that the man is gone and someplace else. I think maybe he was just looking for someone to say something to him for all those years, and when we finally did, he finally found peace. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear narrated on my channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and make sure you hit the notification bell so that you know every time that I upload. Follow me on social media, all the links to that are in the description below. And of course, to save on your data costs, find me on all of your favorite podcasting applications. I'm on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, and more. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door. If you are a serious comic book collector, just starting out your collection, or maybe you're just a casual reader, then you have to check out 3D Comics in Lancaster, New York. From graded comics, custom art lithographs, limited edition prints and statues, 3D Comics is a must-see for the serious enthusiast, but the laid-back atmosphere is perfect for anyone with a love for comic books and more. They also specialize in custom art Funko Pops, taking regular Funko Pops and having a team of artists do original art on the boxes. Each comes with a certificate of authenticity. Located at 32 Central Ave in the heart of the village of historic Lancaster, New York, 3D Comics is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 6, with special appointments available on Sundays. Find them online at 3dcomicsandmore.com. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. And if you prefer to shop online, owner Joel Sharmani has tons of items available on eBay. Find a quick link to that on the shop's homepage. They also feature in-store appearances from today's hottest artists, special offers, and every Wednesday is New Comic Book Day. Give them a call at 716-860-7837, visit them online right now at 3dcomicsandmore.com, or better yet, just stop on in. But no matter where you are around the round world, 3D Comics is your destination for the best in comic books, custom art, and beyond. 3D Comics and More. That's the number 3, the letter D, comicsandmore.com. Tell them Uncle Josh sent you.